And so there's about to be this huge transition with
People that have that story are outpacing even somebody who understands the technology but doesn't have that story.
those robo cameras are going to be operated from somewhere thousands of miles away in the studio.
Exposing it to a generation of people who may not have known that career paths like that exist, right?
It's a really interesting time in broadcast and AV technology where it's like the money is always taught.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today's conversation centers around the people of the industry, specifically the broadcast side of the industry. We're talking not only signal flow, but we're talking about things like industry crossover, best practices, education, teaching, training, social media, all of it wrapped into one conversation today. And to have that is the founder and CEO of Behind the Broadcast, Parker Rattan. Parker, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, man. This is it's actually a dream come true. This is unbelievable that I'm up here on the 35th floor.
53rd.
Oh, 53rd.
Close.
I'm dyslexic. You'll understand that throughout the show. But the 53rd floor above Dallas, it's pretty amazing.
You know, Parker, it's great to have you in studio. And for those people who may not be familiar with who you are, you normally get to live on the broadcast side of our collective AV industries. Give just a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Parker. I run this company called Behind the Broadcast. But really, I think the reason why Behind the Broadcast has been so successful is because I run it and I am boots on the ground, right? So oftentimes you'll have people running companies, but they're suit and tie kind of people. And this collared shirt is about the fanciest I get. And so what I do, I'm a fiber tech and a camera operator. I travel around the country at the largest events, working on a lot of the setup and making sure all the technicals are working for the broadcast. I work for ESPN, NBC, CBS, completely freelance, but I've been fortunate enough to make the connections necessary to be able to be kind of like a perma freelancer, where I have enough work all year long, and it's just been an amazing ride. I've been doing it for about 10 years now. I've done 8 Super Bowls. I've been a part of 8 Super Bowls, couple NBA finals, World Series, home run derbies, major golf events. It's been kind of a dream come true, and I'm continuing to ride this out, and hopefully my platform can help people kind of open the door to be a part of what I've been able to experience.
Well, Parker, I tell you, I guarantee you there are people out there watching right now who look at sort of your career path and say, I want to do that, right? But I think what they may not realize is that there's a lot of hurdles and a lot of challenges, a lot of education, a crap ton of no's that have to come before that. And, I want to ask, even before we kind of dig into the behind the broadcast side of things, talk a little bit about your journey and whether that was starting younger or maybe starting in college, finding your career path in the industry and getting to a spot where now you have reliable, consistent work in the industry.
Right. That's a great question. It's one of my favorite stories to tell. I kind of have a very organic, I would say, way into my career path. I was a sports guy. I was an athlete growing up my whole life. I played baseball, football. But you know what? I was good, but I was never that great. And I knew I always wanted to be a part of these big events, but I didn't have the talent and skill to make it to those next levels. And so then I looked myself in the mirror in high school one day and I said, maybe let's start looking at other avenues rather than being a college baseball player or whatever. And my mom had a connection. I lived in Utah. Sorry, let me go back. I lived in Utah. In a little farm town outside of Park City, Utah. And my mom is from LA, and she had a friend that she grew up with who worked in Los Angeles in television and broadcasting. And so I told my mom I wanted to, be in TV, not in front of the camera. Of course, now here I am in front of the camera. But how do you think I can get to that point? And my mom said, well, I have this friend in LA. Let's get him on the phone and let's talk to him and let's see what he has to say. So this is when I was in high school. And he said, do you guys have a morning show? And I said, yeah. He said, I want you to be a part of that morning show. I want you to learn as much as you can in that morning show. And then, and then I want you to come out to LA and get an education out here. And so I was like, that's great. It's beginning of my senior year. I did the morning show, loved it. And then I was looking at schools in LA. USC, UCLA were top of the list. Did not have the credentials or maybe the finances to get into those schools. So I settled at a school called Cal State Northridge. CSUN for short. So CSUN had a television program because they're in Los Angeles, so they've got a ton of networking out there. And I went there to learn TV broadcasts. And so fortunate now that I've been able to take that career all the way through. But when I went to school, they don't really teach broadcasting, right? You can go to college, you can learn about cameras and you can learn about cinematography and things like that. But when we're talking the broadcasting that I work in, like the live television broadcasting, it's really not taught. And so when I went to college, I was taking classes that were more multi-camera studio shows, like a Boy Meets World or a That 70s Show, where you have these multi-cameras, and we learned how to put on shows like that. Well, just through networking, I think that is the most important thing you can do in any career path, whether it's broadcasting or whatever you're doing, is networking. Meet as many people as you can and learn from those people. And fortunately enough, people knew I wanted to be in sports. I wanted to be a cameraman just because I always talked about it. And so our in-house broadcast team for the basketball team, we were a D1 basketball team and a D1 volleyball team. And we just got this big renovation on our gym. And so we had all these brand new broadcast cameras. They're like Sony 2500 cameras at the time, which with the SMPTE backs and SMPTE backs in like 2012 was very new.
Yeah.
And so I was very, very fortunate to start to get my hands on that newer digital technology at an early time when it was coming out. And so that's kind of how it started. I started getting my hands on those cameras, doing the in-house broadcast. And obviously when I say in-house, that means like the Jumbotron. So we were getting paid $10 an hour. If there were 2 games a week, 3 hours a day, $30, $30 a day. It wasn't anything, but it was getting my hands on the equipment, right? And so I was able to get my hands on the equipment for cameras and then kind of like a little switcher, learn about a Jumbotron and things like that. And then again, the networking comes really into play here where if it was a larger game, like Fox Sports would come in and they would do the broadcast. And so then here I am underneath the basket working for the Jumbotron, and sitting next to me is a guy making $500 a day, shooting the same basketball I am. And so then I thought, hey, why can't I just kind of be like this guy? And so I started networking, talking to more people. And I was a cameraman not long after that for Fox Sports. And then this is when it really became humbling, though, because a lot of people, they come into my industry and maybe they have the same exact experience I just had. They've got camera experience, all this stuff, but you can't expect to start doing the really big shows at the highest level right off the bat. And so I was a cameraman, and then boom, I was a PA. I PA'd for about 5 years. I became a utility, and then I became a cameraman again. And now, again, it's like my 10th year now. And now for about, I'd say 4 or 5 years steady, I've been a cameraman and a fiber tech. So that's kind of like the rundown of my whole career path in a nutshell. I don't want to bore everyone with, the length, but that's about it.
No, that's great context. And I know that, people naturally, the question is, obviously you got where you are, but what does it actually look like day to day, right? I know that there's obviously a lot of travel that's involved in that. There's a lot of variability. Now, fortunately, you're in a spot where you mentioned that you have pretty reliable gear, or pretty reliable gigs, but that's not always the case for people. What would you say typically is sort of the day to day or even month to month look like for your job currently?
So it's very seasonal based. It depends on what's the highest what are the high times of the sports in the country. So, when it's NBA playoff time, I'm primarily focused on the whole NBA playoffs into the finals. When it's football season, I work for Monday Night Football, and so I work 4 days a week in a new city every week where Monday Night Football goes. So every Monday there's a football game, but it's in a new city. And so I'm a part of this traveling circus of about 120 people from around the country, and we travel to every Monday Night Football game, and we set up this massive broadcast. And the reason why they do that is because you can't just go into like a city and hire locally and expect these massive broadcasts to happen. Because what Monday Night Football is doing every week, or Thursday Night Football, or Sunday Night Football, or these massive golf event productions, they're massive 5-truck productions, hundreds of people, and so that's kind of like what I'll do during football season. Is I'm part of that traveling circus. You travel on Friday, you work Saturday, Sunday, the game is on Monday, and then you fly home Tuesday. And then it's rinse, and repeat. And we call that a package, being on a package. And that's kind of like one of the things you really want to, if you pursue this industry, you really want to try and do, is get on a package, because that means you have consistent work. Because there's a lot of people, I was like this for forever, you'll get a call saying, hey, we have an availability for this college football game. Can you work camera this Saturday? And you're like, yeah, I'll work camera. So you work camera that Saturday. And then you might not work for a week or two because, there's not a call. So it's all about the relationships you build and the reputation you build for yourself.
Well, look, part of the reputation that you've built for yourself is behind the broadcast, right? And that's one of the things that I love to see as part of our industry as we continue to expand and evolve, is people are willing to teach and educate a little bit more probably than they used to be, right? We both come from an era where our teaching and education usually came from the salty dog who was on his way out of the industry, and you had to sort of poke and prod and beg to let them look over their shoulder, right? And the reality is now that people like you have sort of pulled that barrier back a little bit, and one of those ways is behind the broadcast, which at this point has over like 300,000 followers or something like that. How does that get started?
Just about to hit 300,000 followers, right around 300,000. How does it get started? It starts with passion. And a little bit of like a dream, but not so much. And it starts with COVID, because COVID was a time, right, where not many of us were working. And so I had a lot of time on my hands, and if you can't tell, I'm pretty ADD. I was a cameraman for a while, and it was too monotonous for me. And so I needed to be doing something else, like fiber teching, where I was constantly trying to solve a problem and things like that. So when COVID hit, I'm like, what am I going to do with this free time? My girlfriend at the time was driving me crazy. I need, something to focus on. And during COVID, TV people, the broadcast people, as well as AV workers as well, we were considered essential workers. And so we were allowed in the stadiums, but fans were not. And so how Behind the Broadcast started was through the small Instagram I created with my friends called Sports with No Fans. And it was exactly what it sounds like. It was showing what these events are like around the world with no fans, because the fans couldn't experience these moments. And so I grew that page to about 2,000 followers, and took about 8 months to grow it like that. And it was all TV people, and then the fans came back. So once the fans came back, I started toying with ideas. What am I going to do with this page? I've got 2,000 organic followers, and I always told myself, if I ever get to 5,000 followers, I'm done. I'm hanging up my hat. I'm like, this is amazing. This is a great ride. And then the snowball effect started to happen. So I was at 2,000 followers. I changed it to Behind the Broadcast. And it was amazing how much the name change can change your business. Just by that name change and that logo completely changed the trajectory of the page. And so when I changed it to Behind the Broadcast, it went from about 2,000 to 5,000 followers. And I had a video that went viral. And this was, Instagram algorithm is constantly changing. It's like the hardest battle if you're in our line of work, social media and things like that, where you're trying to figure out this algorithm. And back then, it was go viral, get a bunch of followers. And so one of my posts got reposted by SportsCenter, and I went from like 5,000 followers to like 8,000 followers in like 4 days, 5 days. And then it went like this, and then it plateaued for a while. And it was just kind of like, this is kind of fun. All right, I passed my 5,000 mark, but I'm going to keep riding this wave. And then I was at the NBA All-Stars in 2022. And I looked up, and there was this cameraman, and I was just fascinated by how he was working. And he was doing something I'd never seen before, where he has his camera, and a lot of times we have servo zooms, and we just use our thumbs, and you push it this way, this way, this way. He has what was called a servo crank. So it's like a crank that zooms in and out. So he'd crank like this, and he'd crank like this, and he's focusing with his left hand, and he's shooting the 3-point challenge. And he is like a sniper, dialed in on the ball every time. Boom, boom. And I'm like, wow, that's really amazing. And so I went up there and I started talking to him. I said, hey, can I just get behind you and kind of film you doing what you're doing? This is pretty amazing. I'd like to share it on my small little page. And he goes, yeah, sure, why not? And that post took me from 8,000 to 20,000 in like one day, or two, like 48 hours. And that was just the power of going viral. And then after that, I was like, proof of concept. I knew it. I knew like people thought this was cool. I just needed to show that it is cool. And then all of a sudden I'm just getting follows from around the world. And then I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to highlight everyone else's work. That's my goal. Is I want to highlight the people behind the scenes, because we are so unknown. There's this like movie magic, but like TV magic about us that is just so unknown, and no one knows the hard work that goes into making these amazing broadcasts happen. You know, we only know about the Brian Gumballs and I don't know, where I can't think of any talent right now, but you know, we only know about the talent, and I want to change that spotlight and shed it on the broadcaster, the people behind the broadcast.
Well, I love to hear that story, because not only are you spotlighting some of the people that are in the industry, you're actually exposing it to a generation of people who may not have known that career paths like that exist, right? One of the things that I always tell people is, you look at sort of the advent of DSLRs and affordable technology that can film video, and you know, people know about servo focus, they know lighting, they know framing, rule of thirds, things like that, because of the affordability of things like DSLRs and now cell phones. And you've got so many people that are interested and have a unique skill set, really, that could translate very well to the industry. And things like Behind the Broadcast are really exposing it to people for the first time, because you're right. You know, there are people who watch. I'm a Cowboys fan through and through, and every week, fortunately, I've had the opportunity to go to some of the Monday Night Football events and know a lot of the crew that work in the stadium. But I realize that a lot of people don't, and it's so interesting to them. And now you have the chance to expose it. I mean, have you seen response from people who said, man, I didn't even know I could do this. I didn't know this was an option.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what's amazing about social media, right, is that anyone has the opportunity to message me and ask me questions and things like that. And a lot of times I'll be very busy, but I will try and get back to as many people as possible. And that is one of the biggest questions I get is, you know, I had no idea about this. How do I get into the industry? How do I involve myself in this? And so, yeah, I've loved that outcome of Behind the Broadcast, and the kind of what you were saying about people getting their hands on cameras and things like that. Like, I really didn't have that opportunity, because usually, even in 2010 when I was figuring this stuff out, like, cameras were really expensive, and now, you know, like you said, they're affordable. You can get light panels that literally like fold out like a cardboard box and just put them up, you know? And you don't have to have these $500 RE tube lights anymore to light anything. And so, yeah, so a ton of people are getting a ton of younger people, younger generation are getting a lot of exposure to these equipment. And I think that is like a reason why the page has done so well, because they are all interested. A lot of people are interested in this. But there's a very big difference too between like, okay, I have a camera, I can just go shoot, than doing it at a professional level. And so I would, with my platform, I'm really trying to bridge that gap and help people do it, because if you look at the broadcast industry right now, and the AV industry might be a little bit different because the technology is very advanced. We're really starting to see this shift right now, even where much younger age generation people are starting to take in these higher leadership roles. And so, yeah, I'm trying to bridge that gap for those people that might have a DSLR, or they might have a little at-home studio setup, and they know how to plug stuff in, and they know how to like create graphics cards and things like that. But they just don't know how to get in the industry. So hopefully Behind the Broadcast can, like I said, can bridge that gap.
Yeah, well, that's a good place to be, right? Understanding a lot of the technology and concepts usually is the hardest part. I can teach you signal flow, and I can teach you how to terminate, a Cat 6 cable or resplice fiber. That's the easy part, right? That's the technical, or that's the physical skill side of it. And understanding a lot of those concepts early on, whether it be rule of thirds, basic composition, lighting, allows people to have kind of a foot in the door. And, one of the things that I like to see too is, as technology becomes cheaper and more affordable, it actually opens the door for a lot of smaller universities and smaller high schools and local theaters and churches. That allows people to get an opportunity to touch some of this technology that may not before. Have you seen a lot of the same thing as people come up through the church world and even some of that high school world? Do you see a lot of those translating over to the pro side?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I think now you're seeing the amateur, kind of like this, I'm not calling them amateurs, but the smaller levels, they're honestly doing just as big of productions as some of the big, where they're doing just as many numbers as views. Let's look at like some of these YouTubers that literally they're getting millions and millions of followers and views and streams all at once. And, and they're just like this kind of one-man band, but yeah, they're using the technology that we're using. And it's just, so it's like, I think we're seeing a much wider span of broadcast and everything. Someone told me like it's like podcast to broadcast. Like you're kind of seeing just like everyone having the opportunity now to share their platform. You see like construction workers and plumbers and a lot of the stuff that, like, my dad is a carpenter and he would never ever think about touching a camera, because if he touched it, he'd probably break it. But now, like, this cheaper technology, or the cheaper tech, and just the easily use of being able to stream just via internet, has allowed all these platforms to like come out and say like, hey, this is what we do. Do you think it's interesting? And so, yeah, I would agree that, especially with the blow up of social media as well, everybody now wants to share their trade on a platform.
Yeah.
And it's, to me, it's kind of like, it's getting a little bit too much. Like, I kind of have like sometimes I say, like, man, I wish they would just leave it to the pros, because you can't just DIY it sometimes. Because, like, it's just, to me, like, as like someone that is a professional, and then you see some of these like productions that people are doing, you're like, oh, that looks terrible. And you have probably more views than the Rangers got last night, but your production looks awful.
That's the grand irony of where we are as an industry and as really a society. Is, I'm going to get shot for saying this, but the technology has become secondary to the story. In a lot of ways, I always go back to the XFL, when you started the first iteration of the XFL, when you saw innovations in Steadicam technology and Skycam technology and things like that. Those were all really cool, and they're still really cool. And you see a lot of these technological advancements happening. But we're sort of at a point now as an industry where, okay, we've got to be engaging beyond just what the technology will allow us, right? We've got to do feature stories. We've got to do all these things. And for the most part, the Monday Night Footballs and stuff, they've been doing this for a while and they love doing it. But you're kind of right where, stepping it back to what I would call the quote unquote non-professional level, people that have that story are outpacing even somebody who understands the technology but doesn't have that story, which is a really interesting spot to be in from an industry standpoint.
Yeah, it totally is. And again, I think the people that get it are the ones that have that interesting story and they have a beautiful, setup, a nice studio. Those are the people that really get it. But yeah, and we're coming to a time where the big money providers, like, the massive sponsors, let's just say, or the massive networks, ESPN, NBC, CBS, they're realizing, hey, maybe we don't need all this gack. Let's kind of dumb it down. Let's save ourselves $100,000 by not having this special, camera. And let's just put a robo out there. And that's probably going to get the same shot. It might not be as pretty. It might not have as much ability to create art with it. But who cares? You're still capturing the flow. And I think that's something that we're really, really going to start seeing in the next couple of years, is especially on the much lower broadcast. Let's talk about like college sports. They realize, okay, we can do this completely remote. We're gonna have one person or three people that go out there. They're gonna set up 4 robo cameras. Those robo cameras are gonna be operated from somewhere thousands of miles away in the studio. And we're gonna switch the show from the studio. We're gonna run the whole show from the studio, and all we're gonna have is 4 cameras out there. We don't have to pay for people to travel. We don't have to pay for hotels. So yeah, it's a really interesting time in broadcast and AV technology, where it's like the money is always talks. And so now we're starting to lose some of that extra stuff at a lot of these podcasts.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what's interesting. You and I had a chance to chat a little bit before the show. You talked about how education was so important, right? And as I talked about how we've got so many different people in the industry who are educated across different things, and teaching them the actual technology side is the easiest. It's one of the things, I don't know if I'd say it's the easiest, but it's one of the easier tasks to teach people once they have the concepts down. You mentioned how important education was to the larger vision of behind the broadcast. What does that look like, right? And how does that continue to evolve even just beyond the 300,000 Instagram subscribers?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think now that a lot of the social media algorithms are changing, and when I say it's changing, it's going from, let's just throw interesting, entertaining 6-second videos out there, and we're going to have someone look at it, engage with it, like it, scroll to the next. They're trying to change that algorithm so that people are using social media for more of educational purposes. And so I've really noticed that as behind the broadcast. I mean, there was a time where behind the broadcast was doing 6 to 7 million impressions. So that means behind the broadcast had touched 6 to 7 million people in 30 days. That was like just in January of this past year. Now I'm averaging about 600 to 700,000. And I think a big part of that is just the change of the algorithm and what the big puppeteers want us to know. And so so I'm changing now behind the broadcast to more of that entertainment platform to try and be educational, where we now really dive into certain cameras that are at this broadcast, or we dive into the jumbotron or the AV part, whatever that might be. And the way that kind of drives though is obviously sponsorships and things like that. Behind the broadcast has been amazing to me. I've gained a little bit of money from it, but I just really want to continue growing it, and the way I want to grow it is through sponsorships and things like that. But I'm not saying I want to get sponsored by Bang Energy Drink. I want to get sponsored by big players in the industry, that so it's all completely organic, it's all in-house, and it's just a complete complete sphere of revolving door of just like educational information about broadcast and educating the people out there. I mean, the people clearly want to know more about this stuff. And so I want to try and use my platform to try and break down all this technology mumbo jumbo, really important information, but make it more consumable for the average viewer.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, that appetite's there, right? You talk about things like influencer marketing and social media marketing, and it's hotter than ever because what brands have realized is that, look, I could put a press release out all day, but if Parker's on site working with this Ross switcher, this carbonite switcher, talking about how he uses it and sets it up, or how we're running fiber ties into the truck, that's really authentic and it's educational, right? Sure, it's sponsored content at the end of the day, but it actually has some transactional value to the end user, and it's not just awareness and things like that. So it's interesting to see how even that influencer marketing side of things has evolved even in our industry.
Yeah, completely. Yeah, like you say, it's authenticity. I feel like I've kind of cracked the code a little bit, where like I'll show you a bunch of fun, entertaining stuff about broadcasting, but then I can sprinkle in, about that Ross switcher and things like that, and I can still gain that engagement. Where if it's Ross or whoever, whatever company, and they're constantly Sony, Blackmagic, if they're constantly talking about their products, it's number one, it's their own expert, and number two, it just gets boring to the average viewer, and so that's why they don't see that engagement like I see the engagement when I talk about it. So yeah, so that is a big transition, and it's all due to modern technology and and just being able to stream and share like that.
Yeah. Well, I got to ask too, I guarantee there are people watching this saying, man, I want to get in contact and reach out, and maybe a sponsorship makes sense. How can folks find you?
Yeah, so they can find me at Behind the Broadcast on my Instagram. I always am constantly looking at my direct messages. You can message me on there. I'm on LinkedIn as Behind the Broadcast. You can email me, business@behindthebroadcast.com. And yeah, if this sounds like something that's interesting to you and you want to be a part of it, come on in, because I've got the room, I've got the team. I'm in the process of building the team, and we're looking to take on more people, because at the end of the day, I want to educate and I want to help, and the way we do that is we want to help the industry players as well. So we all help each other.
Well, I'll tell you what, it's incredible and admirable, right? Not only to see how far you've been able to start your career, even in 10 years, some of the things you've been able to accomplish, not only as a career, but with behind the broadcast as well. It's really, really impressive to see the industry continue to evolve, and I appreciate your work spearheading a lot of that for a lot of the new faces in the industry.
I appreciate that. It's like I said, it's been a wild ride. I never thought I would become the face of anything. I never thought I would be a representative, and that was something very hard for me to overcome, was to be like, oh man, people are looking up to me like this to represent. And I'm not like a master and know all of everything, but I know enough about a lot of things, but I'm not a master at one thing. And so, the much pooling I can get of education and experience, I think the better the platform gets.
Well, I totally agree with you. I'll tell you what, we've got to find a way to have you not only back on this show, but I know a million people that would love to pick your brain, would love to make some introductions for you there as well. But I'll tell you what, thanks for coming on the show today. We really appreciate it, not only from bridging the gap between the AV and broadcast side of things, but being willing to have those conversations in public to teach people. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for tuning in as well. We appreciate you here on Signal Flow. As always, like, subscribe, tune in next time on the show.